The European Commission and the European Parliament. It is a great honour that I welcome our guests this evening. We have Mary O'Rourke, Jeff Murphy, David Hughes, Dr. John O'Brennan and Francis Jacobs, the Civic Officers of Fingal County Council. The discussion this evening will focus on Ireland, the European Union and its relations to the world. Before I do full introductions, I'd like to put this event into context in line with the Europe Direct Centres that are based around Ireland. The Europe Direct Centre in Blanchardstown, which I'm the manager of, is part of a group of 10 Europe Direct Centres throughout Ireland, which were established by the European Commission as a local link to Europe. The Europe Direct Centre in Blanchardstown is based in the Blanchardstown Library and has been in operation since 2005 when this Europe Direct was initially launched. We provide information on Europe to the citizens of Fingal, Dublin, Kildare and Westmeath. From its initial launch, the objective of the Centre is to encourage dissemination of information about the EU and to stimulate discussion, debate and relay feedback from citizens to the European Commission. This is done with the help of the European Commission through the organisation of events relating to the EU, such as job-seeking workshops, European citizens' rights for travel, events, studying and working abroad, including Erasmus+, Horizon 2020, and EU funding seminars for businesses and SMEs in the Fingal area. Along with the hosting of the events, the Centre in the library holds leaflets and publications relating to the EU. And we have a dedicated phone line which gives direct access to Brussels and to expert advice on the EU in any of the official European languages. There's also a computer provided which has free internet access and is set up to dedicated to the European websites. Just a bit on the event this evening would not have happened without the hard work and support from a number of people, and I'd like to take the opportunity to thank them. First of all, I'd like to thank the European Parliament and the European Commission for their support, and the Libraries Division of the Local Government Management Agency, the LGMA, Ruth Montague, who's with us tonight, Joan Ward and Annette Kelly. To Dennis McAvoy and the dedicated staff of Phoenix 92.5 FM who've been advertising the event and who are recording us tonight. And we're grateful for them for informing the listeners. But lastly, I'd like to thank the hard-working staff of the Blanchardstown Library, my colleagues Lisa, Ronan, Fergus, Anne, and Damien Doyle and Vincent from our IT department, who've all worked very hard to organise what I believe will be a very lively debate this evening. Okay, and finally, with great pleasure, I would like to welcome Mary O'Rourke to Blanchardstown as the Civic Officer of Fingal County Council. Mary needs no introduction, having spent many years in the public eye of Fianna Fáil, TD and Deputy Leader of the party. Mary is a woman well known to us with many interests and talents and forthright views, and I expect we might hear some of these this evening. And I'd also like to welcome Jeff Murphy, who has volunteered to communicate and interview Mary this evening. We welcome you, Jeff. Thank you. The other members of the panel that we will be meeting tonight later on is Dr. John O'Brennan, a lecturer in European Studies in the Department of NUI Maynooth. And he's also a director of the Centre for the Study of Wider Europe and the European Studies Department and Sociology in Maynooth also. His work focuses on European integration and the EU institutes, and specifically on the process and politics of the EU enlargement policy. Welcome, John. Dr. John O'Brennan will be joined by Francis Jacobs, our European Parliament Office. Francis Jacobs has been head of the European Parliament Information Office in Ireland from the 1st of September 2006, but he's worked with the European Parliament since just before the direct elections in 1979. Along with Francis and John, chairing the panel discussion this evening will be David Hughes, board member of 92.5 Phoenix FM. David is the Deputy General Secretary with the Irish Nurses and Midwives organisation. David does tremendous community work and is chair of the Toka River Project, the former chair and secretary of the Blanchardstown Area Partnership and former board of the Institute of Public Admin. With that, I'd just like to open proceedings tonight. First of all, we will have Jeff and Mary discussing views on the EU. Myself and my colleague Lisa will be going around with microphones, so if anyone would have questions that they would like to put during the discussion, feel free to call us and we'll come over to you. After their interview, we'll have a break for some tea, coffee, sandwiches, and then we'll start back with the panel discussion. Just a little bit of housekeeping, just to let you know, in case of a fire or anything like that, the doors here will open and there's doors just behind you. Okay, thank you.
Right, I'll start off. You're most welcome, Mary, to D15.
Thanks, Jeff.
And this is going out live on Phoenix FM 92.5, our community radio station.
You mean right now?
Right now, yeah.
Okay.
We're going live. Mary, just like to start off, you're no stranger to Dublin 15. I believe you were here in 1996 for a campaign.
Oh, indeed, I've been here many, many times, and I have relatives living here, two of which are in the hall tonight. And yes, I was in charge of Laura Lodge.
That's right,
in that by-election in 96. So, and I've been so many times in Castleknock and Blanchardstown, but Blanchardstown is a city now. It's huge, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's gigantic.
This is a beautiful building, absolutely lovely. I'm sure it was entered for some architectural award. It's sort of out of this world, isn't it? Lovely, and the library is beautiful here. I met the librarians and I was over in it, and to see all the people, particularly see the children, and they're loving their books and they're getting new books, and some of them were painting and all that. So it's a great amenity.
Yeah, I mean, one of the good things for the Celtic Tiger that we were aware of all this at the time.
Thankfully, yes.
I'm going to, like I said, kind of a discussion about, obviously we're here for the EU, so I'll be asking a series of questions. Some of these have also come in have been tweeted to us, and then I'll open it to the audience.
Oh, that'd
I
be
know
lovely,
you're most anxious that you want people to give us much opportunity.
I do. I think that it's meant to be interactive. So
yeah, so we'll definitely do that. I suppose the most obvious question to a lot of people in Ireland, given the elections are coming up, is the EU still relevant to the man on the street?
Well, it should be, and it is. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of finding out how it's relevant and then making it relevant to us, tailoring it for us. I often think, and I always thought from the very beginning, when Ireland joined up and entered, because of the geographic location, we're a small island off a large island, off the mainland of Europe. So geography, we're very peripheral, and I think that has sometimes meant that Europe seems far away, but it isn't. And I often think, I used to teach history to senior girls before I became a politician, and we were always talking about Europe. And I used to say to them, yes, we think it's difficult now, or that it's a long way to go to get to it. But when you think back, and I'm not here talking on a religious sense, but there's clear evidence that many learned, holy people left Ireland and went to mainland Europe. You go around Switzerland, particularly in Germany, parts of Germany, with saints' names on churches and buildings. So we travelled from Ireland to Europe. So I think we were European before the whole European project got going. Yeah. And I think that's inbuilt within us. But it is part of what we're going around talking about, and we're very lucky to have John talking to us later about Europe and European studies. Part of what is about, we are inclined to think, just as you put it to me, Europe has nothing to do with me. I don't have to do anything about Europe. But I actually think, now not everybody might agree with this, but I think we should vote when the European election, and it will be on May the 22nd. No matter who you go out and vote for, I'm not here in a party political ticket whatsoever, but we have a gift in our hands, which is the gift of voting. You get your card, and even if you don't get your card, go up with your own identification and vote for whoever you think would best represent you.
I suppose, actually, you just kind of led me on to the next question, is about young people voting, but what can be done to actually get them out to vote, in your opinion?
Well, all you can do is preach, like I'm doing now, and I don't think preaching is good for young people, because they say, what's she preaching about? But I do think, when I saw them last week on the television in Egypt, where Morsi had been overthrown, and there was a military coup, and there is a military dictatorship now, and there was a vote, and they were queuing in the streets to vote. And I thought that was amazing. And we see in other countries where the vote might only have been recognised or just given. So I just think people should vote. But now to go back to the relevance, well, I think after Lisbon 1, then was Lisbon 2, one of the features of the Lisbon referendum was that there's much more democracy. The Parliament has a much greater say in legislation, much greater say than ever they did before. Up to that it had been mainly the Commission and the ministers and all of that, but now the Parliament has a much greater say. Mm-hmm. The people, you can petition Europe with if there's a particular point that you want to bring where you feel you've been hard done by. It's very easily access all of the instruments of Europe so that you will in turn have your grievance heard and listened to and hopefully rectified to your advantage. The courts of Europe are very open to petitions from Europeans. We have free movement. We have free movement of services and of people. We have a wide open market for 100 million of people for our goods and services, and that's a great advantage to us. There are jobs within Europe easy to get to now for young people. I know we shouldn't be saying that, we should say there should be jobs all over Ireland, but if there aren't, it's not too much of emigration to go to a country in Europe, because now, thanks to Ryanair, dare I say it, and Aer Lingus, there's very free access to all of the smaller spots in Europe.
Is there, though, not a danger, given what you said, like about all of the European Parliament, or has become, is that there's a kind of danger of over-federalisation, that we just get a bigger entity, and then the budgets, of course, there was a big question mark over the budgets in recent years.
And the budgets have been cut back.
Yeah, but by even our own budgets here, that there was a kind of an oversight, possibly by Germany, about how we spend our money, that maybe we might lose that control.
Well, I tell you, come the next year, I think, yes, in the next budget, our budget will have to go to Europe for oversight in a formal sense. This time it went and nobody sort of knew it was found out and there was ooh-ah. But next time, in a formal sense, our budgets will be sent to Europe for oversight.
So is that a good or a bad thing?
I think it's no bad thing. No bad thing. Now that's a real Irish way of saying it. I think it's a half good thing that we would, you see, we would love to be in all sorts of things. Oh, we can Sinn Féin, we'll do it ourselves for ourselves. But we are part of a wider entity now, and that means there's coming and going, there's to and fro, there's things which are good things, all the roads of Ireland, education. Look at the IT here in Blanchardstown. Much of the funding for that came from Europe, for the new courses which were set up. All the system of the regional colleges, they're now ITs, Institutes of Technology throughout Ireland, were funded from Europe. We wouldn't have had them in the beginning. First of all, the buildings, and then the staffing, and then the courses and the curriculums and all that. So then there are the downsides, and maybe one of the downsides is we've to keep ourselves in good nick, financially wise, So if Angela Merkel has to cast her eye over our budget, maybe we could get our cast her eye over hers. I don't know. But that's it.
That's it, yeah. The Troika, someone has asked about to explain the Troika.
The Troika, they sound like three...
What would your explanation of it be?
They sound like three witches, don't they? I always think that there should be three big bad witches, but there weren't really. When we could not get money, now we won't not go into all the background, we'll be forever at it, but when we found in Ireland that we no longer could borrow at a sustainable rate, the Troika, we got money from Europe. The Troika came to our aid. It's the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank and the European Commission, and we were able to borrow money at a sustainable rate. We didn't get a loan, or we didn't get a gift. People think they gave us money, not at all. We'll be paying back for it for a long, long while, but we borrowed money from those institutions. They came, but for the chance of borrowing, they decided they were going to put screws on us. And they came and they set out parameters of how much we could spend. Now, it was a kind of an all over. You could juggle your various departments within that, but there was a limit put to how much we would have for running the country. And I often thought it was handy for the government. If a thing couldn't be done or couldn't be implemented, you could say, no, the Troika said we can't do that. But in actual fact, the Troika didn't say exactly what each particular minister or each particular department did. They spoke in broad strokes, but they gave an envelope of money, and under that we had to run our country. Now, I think, bearing in mind that kind of fecklessness and sometimes is a feature of Irish governments, and maybe an idea that, sure, we'll get by. It was no harm to be under the screws for a while. And they're gone now, but there's no need for dancing in the streets, because they're going to be keeping a very firm eye on us, and they're going to be ensuring that we're still on the straight and narrow.
Okay. I'll give the opportunity now to some of the questions that we got that were tweeted.
Did they come into your radio?
No, well, they're tweeted, in recent days.
Do you do tweeting? You do?
Not me personally, no. I even get into trouble describing it as Twitter. In fact, I'm tempted to call it budgery at some stage. Anyway, as I say, moving swiftly on. I've got two questions here from Emma Weir. The first one is, the European Union Commission and the Irish government have called for gender quotas to get women into politics. What's your opinion on this? Good or bad?
No, they have called, but not through legislation.
Okay, yeah.
There is no. They have said it was a very worthy thing, and of course it would be wonderful if there was, in all areas of life, equal amounts of men and women. But I do not. We've gone much further than Europe. Europe threw it out as a very good idea, which everybody would agree with. But the government has decided to bring in the, not the local, well, they're hopeful for it in the local elections, but in the general election coming up in 3 years' time, 2.5 years' time, if you don't, if parties don't produce for going forward as many women as men, they will be docked in the money they get to run the campaign. Right. Now, I don't believe in gender quotas implemented in that way. Now, I know I might come out as in fact, I think it's a modern thing. I cannot understand how a woman would, it's a kind of an insult to her to say...
some people would feel that they had to be kind of med allowances.
Yeah, I'll give you a leg up, dear. Yeah. And you can go forward because you're a woman. A person going forward for an election, I think, should be judged on their capability and their potential for perhaps being a good Democrat and being a good, be it a county councillor or an MEP or a TD or a senator. It should not have to be forced upon gender quotas. Now, that's my own opinion.
Oh, no, that's fair enough. And actually, that leads very neatly into Emma's second question, because if somebody was thinking of going into politics and putting themselves forward as a candidate, because we do have the local elections coming up now in the next number of months, next May, could you make any suggestions on what they could do and how they would go about it?
Yes, they should have to join their local organisation, political organisation. If they were Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Labour, Sinn Féin, or if they wanted to be an independent, they don't have to join any local or branch of an organisation. And I used to say this when I was teaching there were young women really, 16, 17, 18. I used to say to them, just don't be hurlers on the ditch. Go out and join your local branch, your local common, your local grouping of a party. Now, and go to the meetings, and don't be sitting there. Now, sometimes the meetings would be boring. There would be treasurer's report, and they're very important, treasurer's report and secretary's report and all that. But speak up. Put up your hand and speak up at the meetings. And make yourself either troublesome, bothersome, or helpful, one or the other, but that people would remember you. And then just keep going to your meetings. They'd be delighted to see you. And make yourself, as I said, an integral part of the grouping. And then later on, when local elections come, say to that group, I'd like to go forward for the next local elections. I would like to put myself forward. And if the common or the branch think that you're good, they'll put you forward. And if you want to go as an independent, you don't have to join any branch of anything. You are your own branch of everything. You just put in your name and put down your deposit and go forward.
Okay, well, like there are the two questions from Emma. Just getting back to the EU.
I hope Emma might think of going herself.
Well, she may be, given that the way the question was phrased. Back to the EU, like, does it care enough about world affairs as an entity?
It is. I think EU has become very relevant to world affairs. And today, if the foreign affairs ministers of all the countries of Europe have gathered in Brussels, I see Eamon Gilmore over there, and they're talking about Syria, and they're very much to the fore of what can be done, what Europe can do for Syria. And Catherine Ashton, who is the roving ambassador for Europe all over, goes to all the trouble spots and talks and brings in the voice of Europe. I think that it has become much more relevant all over the world than it had been. It's not just a kind of a closed shop for Europe itself. It is a world. It is huge, and it's a world influence, and they're aiming to work that influence for the good of other countries in Europe.
Do you think there'd be any, well, not so much a danger, but some people would see it like that in terms of armed intervention, like from the European Union?
No, because the European, under the Irish forces, for instance, they go under United Nations. Mm-hmm. They're in the Lebanon. I know this from Athlone, which is a big army base, and there are quite a lot of the forces there have gone over to the Lebanon, and they're operating under the peace maxim, that they're there to keep the peace among the locals. But I wouldn't wish for Europe, and neither would Europe wish to, but they aim that their influence and their voice, and I think it's very important. After all, one of the founding remits of one of the founding principles of setting up Europe was, after the Holocaust of World War II and all that lost their lives, combined with all that had happened in World War I, that we would be a beacon for peace, and that we would come together in a peaceful way. And that is, I think, that philosophy still underpins a lot of what it means to be European. And I think it's a great thing to think that Ireland is a part of Europe, and that in many other countries, and I was talking tonight to people from the Ukraine. Now, I know that's not part of Europe, but in time it may well be. And because it was part of Russia, Catherine the Great 300 years ago or whatever, Peter the Great and then Catherine the Great, they looked to Europe for their civilization and for their learning and for everything. So I think that part of the world will look more and more to Europe.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on because we've got two more questions, or actually three off the Twitter machine or the tweet machine, whichever it's called. Steve Harris from Huntstown. Does our size diminish our political influence on the world stage?
No, I don't think so. And actually, that's very interesting. I remember when I was Minister for Education. I'm going to name drop now, which one should never do. But when I was Minister for Education and we went to Europe, I was very struck. At that time we were much smaller, back in 87. I don't know what, John, we were, how many countries that time? 12, were we 14, yeah. And, but I was very struck that around the table of the ministers in Europe, my voice carried as much weight when I participated in the debate as did the UK or Germany or any of the other bigger countries. No, and many of the, and that they still, now we're 28 with Croatia in, we're now 28 countries in Europe, and I'm sure there's a few more. I don't know, I think there'll be a pause for a while now, and that if there won't, though enlargement is always a goal. But I think at 28 there's a kind of a time to maybe regroup with ourselves. But to go back to your question, no, our size is irrelevant.
It's irrelevant.
We are important in Europe.
Okay. And Valerie Novak, I suppose kind of close enough to our questions. What changes are these elections, which I presume the MEP elections, are expected to bring to Europe, and more specifically to Ireland?
Well, the changes that will be held now, when the MEPs from this country go into Europe, after May the 22nd, isn't it, yeah? After May the 22nd, they will find their legislative entry will already have been done by the last group of MEPs, and Lisbon will have put upon them a much greater, as I said earlier, much greater, they will be much more important in the forming of legislation, in the drawing up of it, the compilation of it, then the going out into committees. The European Parliament works very much on the committee system, and the committee system is really important. The Environment Committee, the Health Committee, the Committee for Trade and Commerce, all of those, they will have a much greater say. The MEPs, whom we will all go to elect come May the 22nd, will have a greater say now under the Lisbon rules than they would have had heretofore, because they will be forming the legislation in the Parliament. Heretofore they didn't have that much say in the legislation, but they will now.
Okay. Right, I think we'll take that note of question to open up to the floor. So if there's any people out there with any questions for Mary.
Law of North, please.
Stick your arm up as in class. This gentleman here in the
this
front.
is the man from Inchicore, isn't it? Yeah, hello. I can't hear it now.
We just got a microphone.
Oh, yeah.
There,
Hello, Mary. It's one about reform here and how can it be effected without direct access to Europe. And that doesn't mean going through the courts here, which are sadly, the system is rigged with gagging clauses whereby scandal and corruption can't get out. We've witnessed the CRC very recently, and Limerick, of course, was notable in the failure of governance and proper functioning in groups or to direct organisations. But the court service leaves a lot to be desired as well, and getting through that.
The courts?
The courts?
The court service are not, as I mean, well, I have a case now, and I hope to mention it to the lady who introduced us here, that involves corruption from the revenue, the Garda, the court service, everywhere you go. And the Troika are gone now, and that's one area that hasn't been reformed, the legal system.
Well, just to take your end apart, Alan Chatter has put out his regulatory legal affairs bill, and I know the Troika were very keen on that, but he has now produced it. In fact, it's going through the committee stage in the Dáil, and I hope in time it will become law. But all those things of which you spoke, the CRC, the courts, all of those, they're all our domestic business. You know, we have to run our own affairs better, there's no doubt about that. But I think, in truth, Alan Chatter has been busy with his legal affairs bill, which will put, there's lots of aspects to it, and I think he has met with a lot of resistance from the legal fraternity here in Ireland. He aims to, pardon?
I wonder why, in terms of the money.
Yeah, he wanted to, I think, barristers and solicitors to be interchangeable, things like that. But I think when that bill is finally passed and becomes a law, I think you will find the court system will be, and the ways to get to the court system would be more approachable and easier access for the citizens.
Sorry, there's a gentleman here just to the fourth row here.
Good evening, Mary. Welcome to Blanchardstown. The EU climate change bill is being addressed in the European Commission and Parliament at the moment, and that will run to 2030. The polluter are putting pressure on the European Commission and Parliament to water down the bill. How can we address climate change as a positive here in Ireland, and how we can manage water where it's a positive experience for the citizen here in Ireland rather than another tax? Thank you very much.
Rather than
I didn't quite catch that. Sorry,
how can we manage another tax?
Yeah.
Yes, well, we will be paying for our water, there's no doubt about that, and we know enough about it now, I think, to know we should have the meters by the end of this year, which would mean you start paying next year. But and I'm not just, I should be, it sounds odd, I'm sort of standing up for the government all the time, but that's, I did say I wasn't here on a one policy or a one political party platform. But I think most of the countries of Europe, they pay for their water and they pay for their properties, and they're the two things we're going to have to pay. But to go back to the larger question of the environment law, which has been in gestation now in the European Parliament, yes, that is a huge piece of legislation, and by the time it's watered down, as you say, watered down is a bit of a pun, I suppose, but by the time it reaches us, it will have been mitigated, better way of putting it, and what would have been set out through their committee system may not be as penal as we would have thought it would be. But we are, we're all beginning to think. We had the lovely exhibition of the summer this year, June, July, August, September, October, November. We had a continuing fine weather scenario. That's part of climate change, I think, I hope. But whether and the storms that we had recently, 2 weeks of storms here in Ireland, that was part, I think, of climate change. And I hope that the final bill, when it comes out, will be equable to all of the countries, and but I think it won't have any effect on us paying for water. We're going to have to pay for that.
Okay, this gentleman there, third row.
The sound isn't great, just not.
I'm trying to keep my voice.
It's great on the radio.
So, I was just wondering, if Ireland is to contribute to Europe, we should believe in something. Now, 30 years of IRA terror has put paid to republicanism, as far as I know. I stopped voting for Fianna Fáil because I thought you were too soft on the IRA, but anyway, maybe I'm exaggerating. But the Catholic Church is in steep decline, the Irish language is in steep decline. Now, with republicanism more or less gone, the Catholic Church nearly gone, the Irish language nearly gone, what exactly can we contribute to Europe? As far as I can see, we see Europe simply as a cash cow. We don't believe in anything, as far as I can say. And I wonder, could you comment on that? I would be a great fan of De Valera, by the way, but with Charlie Haughey, I stopped believing in Fianna Fáil and whatever.
Sure, we're not going to go into all that now. For goodness sake, I'd be here all night. But there were several points that you said. We certainly are inclined to look at Europe, or in the beginning, certainly, as a cash cow. And over the years, we got huge monies from Europe because when we went in, sure, we were the very, very poorest of the poor, and we got money for this and money for that, and gradually over the years, now there is still money coming, often in a co-funded way, but there is still money coming from Europe. But you said, how do we stop thinking about it as just a cash cow, and have we any belief in it? Well, that's where I would go back to the philosophy of the purposes for which, one of the purposes for which it was set up was the purpose of being in solidarity with other nations against aggression and against war, ever a war again, which did such damage to Europe. I have to answer for my party, we were never soft on republicanism. We were never soft. It was Bertie Ahern. You can say what you like about him. It was he brought about the peace as it is in the north of Ireland. So I hope you'd all excuse me, the rest of the audience, when he said he lost faith in Fianna Fáil, that we were too soft on the IRA. That isn't true. No, we weren't. We were in favour of republicanism in the real sense of this country to be a republic in its beliefs and in its ideology, indeed which Fine Gael and Labour are too, but there is no party in Ireland now in favour of the IRA, absolutely not, and I'm glad of that. But thank you for the question.
Sorry, this gentleman here on the outside.
Quite a number of leading economists have been expressing doubt that the southern European nations, Greece, Italy, Spain, could possibly have any future in the Eurozone, and that sooner or later, maybe sometime within 10 years, some sort of an economic or a political crisis will take them out of the Eurozone. If there is a managed breakup of the Eurozone, would you believe that Ireland should stay with the Euro?
Yes, I would believe that Ireland, I know your point, and it's one that has come up quite frequently. I believe that, I know that it is as the countries you've mentioned, Spain and Italy, well, not quite, Spain and Portugal and Greece and Ireland, let's say those 4 countries, which would be seen as, well, the southern country, the southern part of Europe, that they seem to be the ones that got into monetary difficulty. And would we be better out of the Eurozone? No, I think we're... Now, let's look at it this way. Europe has made great strides. There's going to be lots of changes within the financing of the euro, with the minding of the euro, with how we have to run ourselves to be au courant with the rest of Europe. That was part of the Troika thing. I don't think there's any salvation for us to give up the Eurozone or to give up the euro and to go back to our own currency. No, I don't. And we see the really strong efforts Europe is making to keep Greece in the Eurozone. No matter how difficult it is, they don't want to lose it, neither would it be good for Greece to come out of it, even though they are finding the stringencies and the way they have to operate very, very difficult, about 10 times more difficult than it has been for us. So to answer you directly, no, I think we're better off in the Eurozone.
Okay, front row here, gentleman,
The young man.
Striped shirt.
Yeah, well, he looks young from here anyway.
Yeah, I am young. I'm Dara, and I'm a 5th year student in Blanchardstown Community College in the local area.
Oh, are you?
I am.
Which community college?
Blanchardstown.
Oh, yeah,
Community
right.
College. They're only new. They were only set up about, I think it was 5 years ago.
How many students in that college?
We've roughly about 400 now at the moment.
Oh, you're building.
Yeah, building
yes,
on the way up. But we have a new building in the Blanchardstown Road at the moment, actually.
Are you male and female?
Yes, mixed.
Yeah,
mixed
okay.
school. Anyway, my question. I participated in a Europe Direct soapbox there a while back.
Oh, did you do the soapbox?
I did the soapbox competition,
Yeah.
and the motion for this year's last year's soapbox was citizens are at the heart of the EU. And citizens are at the heart of the EU.
Yeah.
And it was kind of in line with the European Year of the Citizen 2013.
Oh, yes.
And in my speech I spoke about how Europe is a place for everyone, and how even through difficult times the citizens manage to persevere and procreate. But then I hear of issues such as the scandal, I suppose, or the problems with homosexuality and all that kind of stuff in Russia and things like that. And I question if the citizens of Europe, the ordinary citizen of Europe, really does have a voice, no matter, regardless of gender, race, or anything else. So my question to you is, does the ordinary citizen of Europe actually have a voice, regardless of any socio-economic background or anything such as that? And is their voice heard and listened to? And we can talk about economics and all this kind of stuff and politics, but none of that can come from anything else other than the citizen having a voice.
Yes,
so that's
exactly.
my question.
No, and you should be up here, I think. But actually, the root point of your question is democracy. You can only have a voice if you vote. And I started tonight by saying that, and I'm very interested. I heard that they explained to me in the European office about the soapbox, and Ruth, who's here with us tonight, explained to me about it. I thought it was a marvellous idea all over the country. The people got up in their soapbox and talked about it. You were saying how Russia, Putin, and his ideas on homosexuality, his ideas. I saw him being interviewed by Andrew Marr on Sunday morning. There's a BBC television programme on BBC One, the Andrew Marr Show, and it's really good. And he said, oh no, now this is his interpretation of it, Putin. He said, no, he was marvellously well, it was all translated for him, marvellously misunderstood, that he had many gay friends and he liked them very much. Now, you had to take that at face value. It was on the BBC, but that was what he said. But we know that in parts of Europe he has implemented policies against gays, but in mainstream Europe as it now is, I don't think there's any country in Europe, in fact I'm quite sure of it, that operates any policy but of equality, men and women, women and women, men and men, men and women, any kind of configuration you want. It is there. Now that's one part of the question. Your other part of your question is how can the voice of a man or a woman be heard in Europe? Only through your MEP to begin with, your European office in Dublin, your library here, which is a European direct library. You can come in here, and where is the lady? Yes, you can come in here at any time, and they have European forms and information and direct access. Is that so? Yes, that's right. Direct access to Europe from this library, this wonderful library here. So that was really bringing Europe right into Blanchardstown, into your community college, into anywhere. And I think it's a marvellous thing that Europe has done to do that, and that the library section of the Department of the Environment, our own Department of the Environment, saw fit to implement, so that we hope all over Ireland that I hope they would come, that every library would be a European direct office. So you have your MEP, and everyone loves libraries, don't we? There's something about a library. They're about books, and books are good. Turn the pages. I know a lot of you would have your e-books. I don't go for e-books. I like to have the feel of a book. Turn your pages, your chapter, have your bookmark, come back to it. The thrill of reading. Well, come into your library and you can get all the information you want about Europe. Vote for your MEP when the European, you're too young. What age are you?
16.
Yeah, you won't be voting for a while, but you will 2 years. But when your elections come up, vote for your European MEP, he or she, who are putting themselves forward. In that way, you have direct access. Your voice is her voice, his voice is that voice in the Parliament in Europe.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I don't need to cut across.
Okay,
But
you've got one more question over here.
You were saying about the voting age and being able to vote. There are talks to lower the voting age to 16, so I mean the possibility is that if they do that, it will give young people a greater voice in the community, in the local communities, and in Ireland on a broader scale. So that's just something that I think will give young people a greater voice.
Yes,
in our
but
country.
there is a proposal. You know the proposal to give votes to people at 16. That was voted down by the group that are going around taking those ideas that were going around Europe. Tom Arnott, going around Ireland, is at the head of it. But I missed your point of the last question. What did you say if you had your voice in the community?
Well, I was just pointing out that by young people, it wasn't really a question as such. I was just making kind of a general comment about young people being given a voice. That I think the lowering the voting age to 16, or our plans around that to just lower the voting age, would give young people a greater voice.
It would, yeah, to lower the voting age to 16, because young people do vote. You know, I saw surveys there recently. The difficulty of when they go away to college, if the voting day is a day when they may be on their home vote, where their home is, and then they're away in Dublin or Cork or Galway or Blanchardstown or somewhere. But now most places are near home anyway. But I'm delighted you came along tonight and that you participated.
I'm delighted to be here as well.
In the soapbox. Great, well done for you, and good luck to the college.
Yeah, thank you. And also just to say, I'd like to put the previous question about people having a voice in Europe to the other members of the panel later on as well.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
We better be democratic here and say there's a young lady here who wants to ask a question as well, just at the end here.
Isn't that great to have young people? Now I know about you, you're a trainee teacher, aren't you?
I am indeed. Modern lesson point in Rihanna and Gael Ganis Luha. It just baffles me. Irish finally was given an official status in EU language in 2007. However, at the time, we didn't have the lawyer linguists qualified to translate all these documents into Irish. Now we have courses in Kingston's that has trained people to be qualified in these fields. However, the Irish government have not requested that the probationary period for the Irish language be taken away to create well-paid jobs in Europe for young people. I don't know why Fine Gael just doesn't seek the same status that the Malta has for their language and other countries have for their languages.
Yes, this is when Ireland became a recognised European language, and it meant that at all the meetings the translator for Irish had to be there, but it hasn't been taken up enough by the Irish government, is that what you're saying, to encourage young people to go for those jobs? Well, I'm sure maybe Francis would have something to say about that and tell us more information. But it is recognised, and it is a very useful forum for, I did say earlier on, Europe is a very good place for well-educated Irish people to go. But if it's a recognised language, which it is, and it needs translators for all of its meetings, have to be done through the Irish language now, so the Irish government should be encouraging people to go for those jobs. Well, I think maybe particularly Francis, you might be able to fill us in on that when your turn comes here. So we'll park that question on
We're
Francis.
coming to the end of this session. We'll be taking a break for refreshments in a few minutes, so it is, we'll take the last two questions.
Thank you for the
here.
question. Thank you.
Yeah. We'll just let this lady at the back first, because you already had a question in, yeah?
Oh yes, that's right. We have to be fair. Equality is the thing.
Yeah, Mary, I just say you always make everything sound so fluffy and so nice. You know, well, unfortunately...
Gosh, isn't that great?
Unfortunately, it isn't always that way. But the question I want to ask you really is, like, you talk about like Europe as if they're doing us a big favour. They're not doing us a favour. I personally don't think they are. And the question I want to ask you is, how does the European countries treat their local government? Because I think since we've gone into Europe, well, we used to win the Eurovision when we were back those times. We don't win it so much now because we're good Europeans. But I think the only time Europe took notice from us was when they loaned us all the money, all the big fat cats spent all the money, and all of a sudden they knew who Ireland was, you know, and then we did as we were told, and now we're suffering for it now. But my question is, like you mentioned yourself, you said about fecklessness, and you said we should manage our own domestic affairs better. We're not feckless. Certain people got greedy. Okay, so that wasn't particularly, I didn't particularly like that remark, so that wasn't that fluffy. But my question is, the difference between being a national government who dictate the budgets down to the local, what way do all the European countries treat their local, say their county councils? We're in a beautiful office, because I think this government here has destroyed local government.
Well now, first of all, to take you, Patches, thank you for the question. To take the first thing, it's the first time I've ever been called fluffy or nice, I have to say. So now I'm going to go back to Athlone and say it took me to come to Blanchardstown to get someone to say you're fluffy and nice. But no, you talked about, then you said how do other European countries treat their local governments, and that you don't like the way local government or communities have been treated here. I think the local elections will be in May the 22nd. Now, the town councils have been done away with, and I didn't agree with that at all. But there's no more town councils. Athlone is a big town. It's no longer going to have its local town council. It's going to be part of South Westmeath County Council. And community groups, which are non-voted but community, I think will lose out that way. But I think in general, all over Europe, all over the world in fact, but certainly all over Europe, there's a very strong local government. You go into France and every small village practically has a mayor of that small village, and he or she is a very important person. I remember staying one time in a village in France which would be about, it wouldn't be the size of Moat. Now I hope there's no more people here and I'm not insulting them, but maybe half the size of Moat, and that had a mayor and a town council, and they ran their affairs. And I think there's something to be said for having that kind of democracy, local to the people, very get-atable, very obtainable, and very easily accessed for their services. And I think in general, local government throughout Europe is, I suppose every country has its own idiosyncrasies as to how it does it. I think in the UK it's larger regional councils, they have more or less, but many of the countries of Europe have kept their local aspect to their local democracy, and I would certainly be in favour of that. I don't think it's right to do away with your local town council, because you can meet your town councillor on the street, man or woman doing their shopping or going to their job, and you can talk to them and you can meet them easily. So I didn't like to see that going away. But I think they're the main points of what you said, how local democracy is dealt with throughout Europe. I think perhaps when Francis Jacob comes to the platform, he will have more knowledge. But as far as I know, I only know how the French system works, and they have huge regard and respect for their local mayor in their local village. He or she is a very important person.
Okay, so this lady here, we'll make that the last question. And then
You keep on seeing this.
I know, that's it, I'm going to make a break. Go ahead, sorry.
Thanks very much, and really enjoying listening to you. Speaking of democracy, is it not a dangerous threat to democracy that so much of our law originates in Europe, and this is power without accountability? Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, well, it's a very, very thoughtful question, thank you. As all the questions, I'm amazed at the range of them. No, but you see, lots of our laws are coming from Europe, but lots of our laws are domestic. We make our laws, we go to Parliament, we go to the Dáil, and thankfully we still go to the Seanad, and we debate them, and you can listen and look at Vincent Brown or whatever takes your fancy, and that's very much accountability at quite a level. Now, if it's a law emanating from Europe, it comes here, but it will be done in the committee system in Europe, to which every single MEP from every country, all 700 is it of them, 120, will be on those committees, and the Irish MEPs are on. I know that Mairead McGuinness is on the Agricultural Committee, I think, and so she will have a say in what laws being compiled or promulgated on agricultural matters. So it isn't without accountability. Now that's in a general sense, but I know what you mean. It is not as directly accountable perhaps as our laws passed here, but when the legislation comes from Europe to Ireland, we have a way of we can have our own version of it. We don't have to implement it to the letter. Now, in the beginning, I used to think, this is before I went into full-time politics, when I was teaching back at home, it seemed to me that whatever Europe said, we said, yes, sir, yes, madam, yes, sir. But I think we've become more discerning, and I think that our legislation through the committee system in Europe, which is really very good, and through our MEPs who are very hands-on, it's as we went on in Europe and as we got more experience, we were able to bring to bear on the legislation making our ideas from Ireland, which gave us that we were able to put our own nuance into the legislation, which in turn made it more geared perhaps for our country. And after all, if there's a particular piece of legislation passed, which it might be difficult for our country to implement, we get a long period of maybe 5 or 7 years into which it can be gradually implemented rather than implemented with a clap bang. So we get a chance to acclimatise ourselves to it. You know, sometimes there are difficult things. It wouldn't come here now, except if there was a rural element in the audience. The raised bogs were one of those, and they were difficult. Down where I come from and parts of East Galway, they're very difficult because people have always reaped their bogs themselves. But now that's because they were, there's particular plants on those raised bogs which are precious and they're going to go out of being if they're not preserved. Now that gave rise to a lot of trouble, but we had many, many years to implement it. It was signed in 95, I think 96, and here we are in 2014, and now Jimmy Deanan has got a further extension for some of those. So there is a chance, and a chance for input more and to implement it. So Europe isn't very doctrinaire or dogmatic about those things. It gives the home country a chance to acclimatise itself to it, apart from having had its say in the implementation of it. So I think it's much more accountable now. And remembering again, we have our votes, and the votes will be coming up.
Okay. So,
and thank you for such a host.
Dare I say the last question, or?
Well, you keep on saying that. There's a gentleman there.
Okay,
yes.
well, that's definitely the last one. And just while we're getting the microphone to him, you just talked to that young man in the front there about your voice. As you know, Phoenix FM is a community radio station. We're broadcasting here tonight, and it's manned by volunteers like myself. So if you want your voice heard, we've actually a gathering of our own coming up. An information meeting in Dillon House at 7 p.m. on February the 13th. So if you have any of your friends or anybody's out there interested in getting involved, come along to that meeting and you'll meet fellow volunteers like myself, and you will have your voice heard with training, and you can always find us on the Phoenix FM. Not me personally, no, there's other people who do that. They keep me trained.
Yeah, okay.
But anyway, like I said, it's on February the 13th. So with that, definitely the last question, and then we're going for a cup of tea.
Okay, that's grand. I think Putin, he's given this image, a soft image. It's just by coincidence, I think, they're hosting the Winter Olympics. But anyway, the question is, Mary, you spoke about voting and the right to vote, and the MEP's voting coming up shortly. Do you not think that the Irish people would be better served if the EU Commissioner himself was voted by the Irish people?
If the EU Commissioner was...
The EU Commissioner,
yeah.
As opposed to getting the job. Like, the EU Commissioner would be voted in by the Irish people. The new Commissioner...
Oh yes, I think that in time may well come. You mean the European...
Yeah, it's a political appointment at the moment, isn't it? Maya Gagan Quinn or...
Maura Gagan Quinn is there now, yes. And they say Phil Hogan is going. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm out of all that now, thank God. But you think if the Irish people voted for the Commissioner?
I think if each party put up a candidate and they lay out their policies and listen to the Irish people to vote, I think the Irish people would be better served.
Well, it could well be that might be one of the developments which would come along. And if it does, well and good, it would. But, I mean, the government of the day, we would have trust in them that they would send a person who would be good for all of Europe. After all, the Commissioner, when he or she gets to Europe, Maura Gagan now is research and development, but she's not the Commissioner for Ireland. Once she left these shores and went to Europe, she's the Commissioner for Europe. She happens to be Maura Gagan and she's Irish, and we would hope she would look kindly on us, and she does, I'm sure. But she serves Europe, and all of the countries of Europe are under her remit. So it isn't the fact that an Irish person becomes like they are in terms of the Irish Commissioner, but they're the European Commissioner. So I'm wondering if the voting, but it would mean you would have had a say, I suppose, in that person. It might be something that would come about in time.
Okay, so with that, I think we'll go for a cup of tea, and thank you, Mary, again. Thanks, you.
Thank you very much for being a good audience. Thank you.
Very welcome back for the second half of the Europe Direct and Phoenix FM discussion on Europe tonight. And I think the main purpose of these sessions is to promote the European elections, which are next year, and to get people to participate and vote in the elections. So I suppose we'd like the emphasis in this part to be about that and about why people should see a relevance in Europe, why they should vote in Europe. And we have some questions that came into the radio station during the week, which I can kick it off with, and we have some to pick up from the last session as well, and then I'll take some questions maybe from the floor as well. So just to remind you who our panel are, immediately beside me here we have Francis Jacobs, Francis is working with the EU since 1979. Somebody out there weren't born in 1979. So Francis is working with the EU since 1979, and he became head of the Parliament Information Office for Ireland in 2006.
That's right.
2006, I think. So very knowledgeable on Europe, very experienced in Europe, and there'll be a lot of questions going his way. Dr. John O'Brennan is on the far side, and John is from Limerick originally. We could sympathise with him about hurling, but we won't go there tonight. But John is the Professor of EU Studies in Maynooth, and he is the Director of the Centre for Wider EU. And that again is controversial at the moment. People know what's going on in Ukraine. It's one of the issues about how big will Europe become, whether it's wanted in some of these countries, or whether it's been foisted upon them. It's a big, big issue. So questions on that are very relevant. And then we're very glad to have Mary O'Rourke. What can I say about Mary O'Rourke? She's the politician that nobody dislikes. I think right across the board, she's a very well-loved politician in the country. And even my boss, Liam Doran, said to pass on his good wishes to her tonight before I came out. So Mary gave you her views on Europe there in the first half, and took on some of the questions, but you might want to put some more questions, and she'll contribute in this half as well. So I might just kick off with one of the questions which came in to the radio station during the week for this session, and I might put it to John first of all, which is the European elections are coming up in May of this year, and why would people vote for an MEP? What power has an MEP got? Isn't it really just a consultative parliament, and really is there any point in voting for them? Over to you, John.
Well, the answer to your question is it is far from being just a consultative parliament. In fact, there was a letter in the Irish Times this morning which implied exactly that. And actually, it's been 25 years since that was the case. With each successive reform of the EU treaties, it's the European Parliament that has gained most power. So that we're in a position now where the Parliament is a co-legislator, so-called, with the Council of Ministers. So the European parliamentarian, especially members of powerful committees, are, I would say, as powerful as some cabinet ministers are. I would say, for example, that Mairead McGuinness, who is a very respected member of the Agriculture Committee in Brussels, she is arguably more powerful than our own Minister for Agriculture.
Does that mean that if the European Parliament develop legislation through this committee system, will the European ministers, the Council of Ministers, be able to veto that legislation?
No, the question, if I may say so, is premised on a misunderstanding of the system as being adversarial, when actually it isn't. The European Union system revolves around cooperation, for the most part, so that the Council of Ministers is the preeminent legislator, but over time it has been joined by the European Parliament, so that the Parliament now enjoys equal status. But there is a complex process whereby each of the institutions has a role. The European Commission proposes legislation at the beginning of the process, and then right at the end it implements the legislation. But that legislation has got to be agreed by the Council of Ministers, meaning our national ministers, when they meet together in Brussels, along with the Parliament. So there's a dual executive, if you like, which is different to that which pertains in most national systems like ours, and actually makes it a bit difficult to understand. But nevertheless, power is kind of spread across the institutions so that no one institution is too powerful.
So why should you vote for an MEP candidate? Because they'll have
because MEPs have now got a very significant input into policy which they didn't have 20 years ago, and the Lisbon Treaty, if you like, copper-fastened that cumulative process through which the Parliament had accrued more and more power. So when you're voting for a member of the European Parliament on the 22nd of May, you're doing so on the basis that potentially that person is going to be really important in debating, framing, revising legislation that will have an impact on every community in Ireland potentially. So that's the reason I think that you should vote.
Okay, Francis, I'll go to you on this occasion. This election, the Irish people will be voting for 11 MEPs when they previously had 12. Are we losing influence in Europe because of that?
Well, there are the European Parliament is actually the largest parliament in the world, so it has 751 members, so it's huge. And before there were 12 and now sadly there are 11. It'll be interesting, it may be revised in the future because Ireland has been the fastest growing country in population, so possibly in the future it may regain a seat, I don't know. But I think the important thing is that when you're only 11 or 12 among 750, on your own, you're not going to be able to shape the agenda. So what you have to do is you have to work with your colleagues of other countries in order to get allies from other countries. For instance, Irish agricultural MEPs on the Agriculture Committee or on the Fisheries Committee have to have allies in other countries. So, for example, it's typically the French have often been allies with the Irish members on agricultural issues. On financial services issues, some of the British members are allies with the Irish members. So it's a question of within your own political family, because each member of most members of European Parliament, unless you're an independent like Marian Harkin, join up with colleagues in other political groups. Even Marian, who's an independent, has joined up with a Liberal group. And you sit down with your colleagues, your Liberal colleagues or your Socialist colleagues or your European People's Party colleagues like Fine Gael and try and work out deals. We'll support you on something which is of interest to your national concerns if you support us on our Irish concerns. So it's a question of how smart you are, how you work the system so to have far more influence than just the numerical status is. And I think generally speaking, over the years, the Irish members have been very successful.
So whether it's 11 or 12, they won't lose that?
I don't think so. Of course it makes it, I regret that there is one less, but I still think that they will keep that influence, and it depends on the quality and the energy of the people who are elected in May to make sure that Irish interests are defended, and at the same time the Irish MEPs who are elected are also looking at the common interest of other countries as well. So that decisions are taken in the wider interest.
Elect good candidates on the basis of their policies.
Yeah.
That they can unite with other candidates. Another listener was concerned about the talk that England might leave the EU and the impact that might have on Ireland. So if I could just put that to Mary, just as an
Yes, but first of all, before we do that, there was a young lady asked me a question. Can we get that now?
I'll come to that.
You'll come on to that, okay. Europe, yeah, well, I don't agree with, I think David Cameron is acting wrong and foolishly in the UK in saying that he would have a referendum in 2018. He's under threat from UKIP, which is the far right in the UK at the moment, and they're threatening this and that about Europe. And at the moment, again on the Andrew Marshall, I saw where they are the top. The UK are the top chance of getting MEPs from their party. But if I myself don't believe that the UK will leave, I can't see them leaving Europe. And what David Cameron has said is that he will put a number of points to Europe, and if they can see their way to help him in those points, he then won't have a referendum because they will have got their way. Now for us, what will it mean for Ireland? Well, England is our biggest market, but we have the rest of Europe as well, and England would want to keep with us anyway. They will want to buy our goods and they will want to sell their goods to us. So I suppose between the two of us we'd work up some kind of a market between us, but I hope it will never come to that. I do not want to see the UK leaving Europe. It's useful for us to have them there. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, we should say that when we joined the EEC 41 years ago, Britain was our main export market, right across the board. About 60% of our exports went to Britain. Today, only about 16% of our exports go to Britain. So it's much less important than it used to be, even if in some specific sectors it is critically important. Now, the government has been behind the scenes pushing diplomacy in all kinds of ways because they are worried about this. And there are all kinds of ways in which Britain is an ally of ours on corporate tax and other things in the European context. But I agree with Mary. I think not only was it very foolish, it is almost absurd, actually. It has a kind of Monty Python element to it, this whole drama. Cameron has no chance at all of getting what he has suggested that he's going to ask for, because that would require all 27 other member states agreeing, and that is simply not going to happen.
Is that not the very risk that if he makes a demand which he cannot get, that the English population will then vote to leave the Europe? And if they do, listen to the other panelists, Mary, that would not be a positive thing for Ireland.
All of this, of course, is contingent upon him winning the next general election. I don't think there's a chance in hell that he's going to, and he shouldn't, because it's one of the most shameful governments in modern history.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's fairly strong stuff. Just picking up the question from the last session that was asked to Mary, and I think, Francis, she asked that it would be referred to yourself. And this is the question about the Irish language was accepted as an official European language, and that brings with it consequences. One of them is that all debates have to be translated into the official languages of the European Union once there's at least a member with the official tongue there. The problem is the number of interpreters, and what are the Irish government doing to promote interpreter jobs? I think that was the...
Just to add to that point, in 2007 when we were finally granted this status, there weren't people qualified to translate the documents and to the Act government. But now, King's Institute legal translation course that I myself have done, DCAP masters in legal translation. Now we have the person, we have the graduates, and yet
the jobs are not there.
Well, the jobs are there. The Irish language, the government asked for the probation period for Irish language to go, they give them full status, and yet they haven't asked for it.
Okay, I think you got that question.
Yeah.
The question is, why haven't the Irish government pushed for it to be used in Europe? Because then the people who are trained could be employed as interpreters.
If I can firstly talk about the status of the Irish language in a wider sense, because one of the remarkable things about the European Parliament is, although increasingly the members from all the different countries tend to communicate actually in English more than any other language, one of the key principles of the European Parliament is that national languages can be used. So any person who's elected doesn't have to be a linguist. If you're elected as a Portuguese member or a Greek member, you cannot insist that that person speaks another language, but they have to speak their own native language. If they are able to communicate in another language, so much the better. They're better at communicating and making allies. But they have the absolute right to speak their own language and to receive texts in their language. And I think that's hugely important, not only for that reason, but also as a defense of the cultures of the different countries of the European Union. It is extremely important that there doesn't become just one common English-speaking or even French-speaking thing. It's really important because national languages are absolutely vital. I remember when I started in the Parliament, many of the Danish members spoke fluent English, but they insisted on using the Danish language because they said if we just speak in English, our Danish culture will be undercut. So it is a really important principle within the European Parliament, which is the most multilingual parliament in the world. The United Nations has 6 languages. Well, the European Parliament has more.
The questioner's point to is, do the Irish government lack the confidence to force the probationary period for the Irish language to be used as an official language?
The key thing is, firstly, there are actually very few trained Irish interpreters, for instance. It's increasing, but there's still relatively few. An amazing irony was until about 2 or 3 years ago, now there's a course on training interpreters in Galway. But before, you had to go to Westminster College in the UK to train professional interpreters in Irish. And they have to have other languages as well. Because an interpreter, it's not just Irish into English. They have to also be good at other languages as well. It's a very, ironically, one of the interpreters within the European Parliament from the Irish language is an American who didn't speak Irish till he was in 20 He learnt Irish, and now he's one of the best Irish interpreters. He lives in Kerry. He's lost his American accent. He sounds now as if he's never left Kerry in his life. And he's one of the star interpreters. But there are relatively few interpreters. The other thing is the extent to which the language is used in the European Parliament. For instance, at the moment, the Irish language is not used in the European Parliament committees because there aren't enough interpreters. If an Irish MEP wishes to use Irish in the plenary, they have absolute right to do so. And I hope that in the future there will be more demand from the Irish MEPs to use it in committees. If there is that demand, then there will have to be a real push to have more Irish interpreters. So it's, yes, the whole principle is vital, but it also depends on demand from the Irish members as well.
Okay, John?
There is a related point, and that is about the reduction in the number of Irish people working in the EU institutions. Yeah. This is something government is actually really worried about. In the 1970s and 80s, we were kind of overrepresented to an extent, and actually very much so at the upper levels. Today you may have seen the report that David O'Sullivan, who is the head of the European External Action Service, is about to become EU ambassador to Washington. Well, he is somebody that went up the career ladder, like Catherine Day, his equivalent in the Commission. But currently, the number of young Irish people going to work for the institutions has dropped alarmingly. So one of the really good and positive functions of meetings like this is that we might get the message across to younger people about the opportunities that are there in Brussels. And about how they might be pursued. But Irish interests can be pursued in all kinds of ways, and not in the most obvious ways sometimes, but we certainly need to see more young people applying to and working for the Commission and the Parliament especially.
Yeah, but I think John makes a very important point, because there have been 6 Secretary-Generals of the Commission. 2 of them have been Irish.
Which is amazing.
Which is amazing.
Of all countries, yeah.
So when people say that Ireland hasn't had an influence, that's a direct contradiction. It's true what John says, but we're not getting so many younger Irish people to join the institutions, and it's absolutely vital. But if you are a translator, there are great possibilities for Irish translators to work in the system generally. All I can do is to echo what John said. We need to get more Irish people applying to work in the European Union institutions, because their influence is not just about having an Irish Commission, it's also about having Irish people right through the system.
Okay, question about just on the interpreter. It's actually quite interesting if you go to meetings in Europe, sometimes your interpreter into English is actually translating from 2 other languages through another interpreter to speak English. So you can actually see it in action, and it's quite amazing. Their skill is just absolutely phenomenal. It's an exceptional skill. Sarah.
Hello, hi. I have a question for the panel, and apologies to pick yourself in the right. You mentioned about alliances. Now, my understanding, and I'd like you to explain it to me, everyone here, and the listeners of 92.5 Phoenix FM, is that to me, Fine Gael were kind of the first out of the traps. They were the ones that kind of first of all went for Europe, and they joined and they made allegiances within Europe. When Fianna Fáil went to go in to do that, the allegiances perhaps that they would have made, the broader political party groups within the EU, they weren't able to have those allegiances because Fine Gael had got in there. So you're talking about socialist groups, you're talking about different groups within the EU. That pushed Fianna Fáil more towards right-wing groupings, was my understanding.
Yeah, but they're out of that now.
And explain that to me, because if I want to vote, if I want to vote not just from MEP, but for a particular political party, am I voting for something that I'm not aware of within Europe and within allegiances within Europe that I may not want someone to be part of?
Yeah, one very interesting thing in this election is that all the political parties standing for the European Parliament elections are being encouraged to say more about which political group they belong to. In fact, the Irish members do belong to the most influential groups in the European Parliament. If you look at the 12 existing MEPs, the 4 Fine Gael members are in the biggest political group, as you suggest, the European People's Party, the former Christian Democrat group. the Fianna Fáil members and Marion Harkin are in the Liberal group, which is the third largest group. The Free Labour members are in the Socialist group, which is the second largest group. And at the moment there isn't a Sinn Féin member from the Republic, but there is one in Northern Ireland, and she's in the fifth largest group. And in the past there have been Green MEPs who've been in the fourth largest group. So generally speaking, the Irish members have been in groups which have had an important role. But one very thing which hasn't been said so far is there's going to be another distinctive feature of this election which has never happened in the past. And that is, someone raised in the previous session about making the European Commission more democratic by having within the national selection within Ireland, and of course that's up to Ireland how it selects its commissioner. But this time round, each of the political groups will be going into the European Parliament election with a candidate to be the President of the Commission.
To be the Barroso of.
Yeah, exactly.
The next Barroso.
So, for example, the Fine Gael members will be arguing for the person chosen by the European People's Party, and that's going to be actually in the first week in March. The European People's Party is going to come to Dublin, and they're going to choose their Europe-wide candidate in Dublin. So that I hope that that'll get some attention and publicity. The Socialist group, we more or less know that the current President of the Parliament, who's a German socialist called Martin Schulz, will be their candidate, and the Liberals, we don't know who their candidate will be yet, and then the other groups will also. And we're hoping that firstly, in the past there's been a tendency for the European elections to be 28 national elections, and this will add a little bit of a European dimension, because these candidates will have to come and speak in language which people can understand in Ireland, in Portugal, in Italy, in Finland, and be able to communicate with people in different ways to say why they should be the President of the Commission.
We should also say that there's another layer of accountability, to go back to that question about the Commission, and this is in the hearings that will take place. Once the commissioners are nominated, they then have to go before and face the relevant committee in the European Parliament, which has kind of echoes of the American congressional hearing system. And they really do now face a strong grilling by those members. So much so that last time, you may remember, the Italians nominated a very controversial commissioner-designate, Roto Buttiglione, and he was rejected, or would have been rejected, he was withdrawn, because it was absolutely clear that he would not have the votes to get through the Parliament. So in that sense as well, although we don't have direct accountability, we do have an important process through which the Parliament can...
Something similar happened to an Irish nominee?
It's never known.
Wasn't there an Irish nominee who was blocked by the committees as well?
No.
Or challenged?
No, that was in a different institution. But Charlie McCreevy's process was far from straightforward, the nomination process, and he ended up being one of the most detested commissioners ever to have served in Brussels, for very obvious reasons.
Sorry, can I just take it then from answering my question, is that when someone comes to my door and they want my vote, I'm not voting for them as A, a person, or B, someone's part of a political party in Ireland. I need to know what other groups within Europe or within the Liberals, if I don't like someone in Austria, I know something about a particular party within another part of Europe, they may actually have an influence within the MEP that I may elect.
Yeah, well, I think what you should do is, when the Wood MEP, whether he is now an MEP or not, you should say, well, what grouping, if I elect you or if other people, thousands elect you, what grouping do you propose to join up with in Europe? And that will fair test his or her mettle. If they're a new candidate, they might know what you're talking about, but they should. But if they're an established candidate, they will know what party to which they belong. So that's how you know, that's how you can test your rights.
And could I also maybe suggest that when you are confronted with candidates, to ask them very simple questions to test their knowledge of Europe. During the last referendum or parliamentary elections, News Talk did a very famous quiz whereby they set 10 questions which are set normally for, I think, 16-year-olds across Europe. Very basic questions. What is the capital of Bulgaria? Things like that. Most of the candidates actually got the questions wrong, with the exception of Brian Crowley, who got 9 out of 10. We had one candidate who got 0 out of 10. So there are very basic questions that you can ask them, and that there is a point to this, and it's about ascertaining whether these people are actually serious about representing you at European level. Because if they are, they should have a stock of knowledge in respect to Europe culturally, politically, geographically, and so on. And the best thing that you can possibly do is to test them at the doorstep.
Well, I think the most important is, do you like them as candidates? Do you think that they have the degree of knowledge? But then it is a legitimate question to ask about the group they're in. But one thing which is really important, the big groups like the Socialist Group and the European People's Party and the Liberals, they don't all agree with each other. Within the Liberal group, for example, there are quite big differences between more conservative people and so that there are great varieties within the political group, and I think that's normal because in politics you don't always have to agree with each other. The question is, do you have a decision-making thing within your group to take good decisions for your own country and for Europe? And sometimes it's an advantage to have people with different backgrounds who you can then, as I said before, make alliances with to try and get your own, the things you're fighting for through the system.
Okay, have you any other questions from the floor? I have a few from the listeners that I'll bring in, but someone wants to come in there from the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Susan Lovett and her staff. I'm very well up on Europe because she gives me all the information that I need. Also, Francis Jacobs and Grania Galvin that sends the weekly emails out. Before I get on to my question for Mary, I have to follow up on the question that the young person from Blanchardstown College asked. The EU Youth Guarantee came into effect in January 2014. It guarantees all young people employment, education or training. However, older people are living longer now, and there's nothing in that youth guarantee to address them. I think that their needs should be addressed and there should be a balance in the EU law.
Okay.
Yes, well, can I take that
well,
first?
Mary's just going to come back on that.
First of all,
Can I just get on to the second question?
Oh, God bless you.
Second one.
Right.
Mary, you were involved in women's rights, I noticed from the website and from your publications and so forth. However, in the new multicultural Europe, these rights are seen in some cultures are not rights. How do you think rights, culture and ethics can evolve, enrich and transform in a new Europe? Thank you.
Okay, two big questions there, Mary.
Well, the other
first one is the balancing
The first
rights.
one is the youth guarantee, and that guarantees to everyone under 25, 26, if they're over 4 months out of a job, it guarantees them a job, a training, education. They get that. This government has sent the plan to Brussels, as I understand it. It's co-funded, we get money from Europe, but we put in our own money to it as well. And that is for young people, because right throughout Europe, the big problem in unemployment is youth unemployment. And after all, the thoughts of youth are long, long thoughts. We have to get young people working. I mean, the future of our country and our continent depends on the vigour and the strength and the knowledge of young people. And we are a particularly young country compared to a lot of other European countries. So the youth guarantee is for young people. Now you say there are a lot of older people, quite rightly so. But of course there are loads of people young at heart. But older people have a chance to go back. There's lots of European initiatives which have been translated here. The VTOS, the Vocational Training Opportunity Scheme, which is wonderful. In 1989, I'm going to blow my trumpet now. I was Minister for Education when we brought that back here to Ireland, and loads of people mature adults went back to education. So there are chances for older people, but the youth guarantee is to ensure that young people, before their dreams are thwarted forever, that they have a chance to get in. I think it's wonderful, and I'm sure there will be a big take-up, and anybody who's here who has sons or daughters or are young themselves, it's a great guarantee. And it's something Europe is putting forward, is proffering. Now you're talking about women's rights, how they're going to be implemented all over Europe. I frankly don't know. I would hope that Europe... Culture and ethics. Ethics.
She's from Fianna Fáil, she doesn't know anything about ethics,
See, hear him, I know all about ethics, thank you. I can stand on my ethics any day of the week.
You just wouldn't recognise them.
No, I quite don't know what you mean. Are we to see it in other countries?
In some cultures, what's seen as women's rights are not seen as women's rights.
Oh yes, I know.
But ethics is a concept of right and wrong. So how can the three balance can be enriched and transformed from a new thinking of it in Europe, where everybody has the same rights? Because it is inherently right.
That would be very difficult, I think, to see that everybody would... He's talking in a feminine sense now, isn't he?
Yeah,
You're talking about women's rights. Yeah, well...
But I suppose there are nine grounds for equality in Irish legislation based on the European law. Maybe Francis might...
No, just a couple of things. Firstly, to your first question about, obviously, one of the key things in tackling the economic crisis has been to tackle the terrible level of youth unemployment. It's terrible in Ireland, but in countries like Greece and Spain, it's been over 50%. It's staggering. But that's not the only measure that the European Parliament and the European Union has been looking at. One thing which Irish members have been very strong in fighting for, and I hate the term because it sounds like jargon, the Globalisation Fund. But that is a fund, a European fund, which means that when people lose their jobs, they can apply to the European Union to get money for retraining, and that's not just young people, that's people whatever age. And the first application of that in Ireland was for Dell workers when they lost their jobs in Limerick, and then they were able to apply for the funding, and there are several other cases, for example, Waterford glass workers who were retrained, and so on. So this is a fund which is really meant to address people who lose their jobs, whatever their age. On the other point, one of the key things about the European Union is certain fundamental rights, which are laid down in Code of Fundamental Rights, which have to be defended in all European countries. And it's true that when you have 28 countries with very, very different backgrounds, different religions, different backgrounds, sometimes they have a different approach to the defense of those rights. But it is absolutely fundamental that not only are these rights, but they can also be defended in the courts as well. And that's a really important thing for gradually Europeans beginning to have maybe the same set of rights, but of course they will be interpreted in different ways in different countries.
Yes.
Okay, can I just remind everybody that this has been broadcast live as a programme on Phoenix FM, so if questions are coming from the audience, you must use the microphone, otherwise you can't be heard outside of the room. So even with follow-up questions, you must use the microphone. There's a questioner here ready to come in.
Thank you. The United States of America is a common currency area. It's a monetary union and it's a fiscal union. It's budgeted percentage of the GDP of the country, and it's able, say for instance, to use federal monies to put them into regions of the United States that are suffering unemployment and so on. Now, Europe, on the other hand, is a common currency, has got a common currency, but it's only got a monetary union, not a fiscal union. The budget of the Eurozone, I believe, is approximately 5% of the GDP of the Eurozone. Now, I think quite a number of economists have been looking at this over the past 10 years or more, and have been querying the basic design of the euro, and have been asking the question, is it not in fact a currency standing on one leg? Is it not the logic of the situation that to make the Eurozone stable, to make the Euro stable, there must also be a larger budget for the Eurozone and also a fiscal union. In other words, taxes levied at the centre, however they might be, and paid into, and funds transferred, not loaned to countries like Greece and Portugal and so on, that they don't have to pay back, and that doesn't leave them indebted. Now this is in fact something obviously that would be hugely unpopular. Additional taxes and additional control from the centre. But is this perhaps a nettle that needs to be grasped in the next 10 years? Thank you.
Okay, John, I think the sense of the question, or Francis, the sense of the question is that is the euro standing on one leg because it has no central taxation mechanisms by which it could have a central distribution, that it would be a much more centralised Europe, I think is what the question.
It's a very, very fundamental question, because you're absolutely right that when the euro was set up, it was essentially an agreement to have a monetary union. And as you know, we've been going through a horrible economic and financial crisis. Signs now of we're beginning to come out of it, but it's still fragile. But one of the key developments of the last 2 or 3 years has been a realization within the countries of the Eurozone that there needs to be more economic policy coordination between them if the monetary union is to thrive in the future. And a lot of, actually the European Parliament has been looking at a whole series of things to improve financial supervision. At the moment, one of the things which is being examined is a banking union. Very difficult, very sensitive, still no final agreement on it, but the idea is that if a bank fails, there are European means of helping it, so that the whole idea is that there should be stronger measures at European Union on the economic side. And one of the things which the new European Parliament will be doing will be to take part in this, looking at the European Union budgets, and the national parliaments and the European Parliament will be looking at the budgets to make sure that some of the mistakes that were made in Ireland and in other countries won't be repeated in the future.
But I think the question he's asking is about taxes.
But I was going to say, Mary, a second aspect to that, which I personally strongly agree with, but unfortunately there's no agreement among the leaders of the member states, is should there be greater solidarity between the countries of the European Union and a bigger, in addition to the economic coordination, should there be also a much bigger European budget? You said 25% for the United States and then said 5% for Europe. In fact, it's only 1%. It's a tiny budget, and it hasn't gone any bigger in all the years I've worked in the European Parliament. And that means that if a country is in trouble, if Portugal or Greece is in trouble, or Ireland, there isn't the solidarity that, for example, America can show towards a poorer one of the United States, or within Germany, where one of the reasons Germany didn't do very well for a while after unification, now of course it's doing well economically, is that a huge amount of money had to be transferred from the former West Germany to East Germany, and from the richer parts of Germany to the poor eastern parts of Germany. And the logic of the European Union system should be that poorer areas are backed up by the richer areas of the European Union, in the interest of all. Because if people don't have a crisis like Greece or Portugal have had, then the whole of the European Union will benefit if everyone prospers. So when a country is going through hopefully temporary crisis, it can be backed up. Does that require Europe-wide taxes? It certainly requires more transfers from the member states, whether it's taxation or from the budget of the member states. The only problem is that the European Union is not the United States. It is still it's not a federal Europe at all. It's a Europe which is more than a series of 28 national states, but it's nowhere like the United States of America or Canada or Australia or the federal, or within the European Union, the Federal Republic of Germany. So it makes it very difficult when countries on taxation, every country can veto decisions. So if one country doesn't want a new tax or something, a direct tax to be introduced, it can block everyone else. So within the existing system, it's very, very hard to change that.
I actually believe that keeping taxation domestically in our own country is the way to go. I mean, what you've put forward, I know you haven't put it forward as your own philosophy, but it would be leading to a complete federal system. What we have now is a sort of a halfway house. We have our own, we're a group of nation states moving closer together on many, many matters, but not quite to the point of like the US or Australia or all those who are able to give huge help. You know, when the US has floods and all the rest of it, they give a huge amount of federal aid, don't they, to the country. So I think taxes will remain domestically rated and kept. But I do agree that Europe should help other countries.
I agree.
1% is very big.
I agree very strongly with Mary, and I don't think in the near future we're going to move from 1% to 25%. But there's a big, big case for moving from 1 to 1.5 or 2%, which wouldn't require major new taxes, and at the same time would give the European Union more chance to help countries which are in trouble. So we're moving a modest step forward. I remember when I started, there was a group of economists came up with, actually chaired by a British economist, who said, we're not going to move to a federal Europe in the near future, but if the European community, as it was then, is to thrive, we need to have a bigger budget, and we should have a budget of 2 or 3%. And now, 30 years later, we're still stuck on the 1%.
And if anybody has any fear about moving budgetary policy to the European level, let me just put it like this. Twice in my lifetime, our economy has been almost destroyed by our Gambine national politicians. Mary's party, twice in our lifetime, has brought our society to the brink of utter destruction. And for me, maybe that not everybody agrees, but for me, give me German monetary and fiscal policy any day of the week over Fianna Fáil.
Can I just say something?
Mary has to get a
No, can I just
there.
say something on that, please? I know your politics, that doesn't matter to me. But can I say, a man in this constituency saved Ireland, and his name was Brian Lennon.
Okay, well,
And he was Fianna Fáil.
Can I just put a question that came in from listeners, and then we'll go back to the audience. The listener's question: the European Union started off. European Union, as opposed to the EEC, started off as the idea of being a social Europe as well as being an economic Europe. It seems that the social Europe, while the flurry of legislation that we got in this country was the early 70s when we joined it originally, the early 90s we had a good bit of equality legislation came on top of that, but short of that, there's been very little movement on the social Europe, and it's actually regressing at the moment. So the listener's question is, has it become back the European Economic Union as opposed to the EU, the European Social and Economic Union?
I think it has, but this links to what Francis was saying just a few minutes ago, which is that the social is intimately connected to the capacity to raise tax. So the link between those two things is very important. You can't spend money unless you've got the tax-raising capacity. So until the member states actually give the European Union the power to raise taxes to a significant or sufficient level, then you're not going to see any substantial advances in social.
The questioner is coming from the point of view of the cap domination of Europe for so long, and now the apparent business domination. Have people, as the voice of the people, been lost in Europe because of the domination of business interests? And the cap was dominated Europe for so many years.
But you look at the youth guarantee, which we spoke of earlier, that is a complete social policy.
But it's meaningless, Mary. It's utterly meaningless. It's way too late. There's been far too much destruction, not just in Greece, Spain, Portugal. In Belgium, unemployment is very high, in France and in other countries. So the EU is way behind the curve here, and there are many individuals, families and communities that will never recover from this.
But if I can answer, obviously over the years the European Union has developed a wide range of social policies of all kinds. We're working on for example, maximum working week, a whole series of things. Of course it's controversial. Some people say, we should be allowed a 70-hour week. And yet the majority of people within the European Union say, no, there have to be a maximum. There is a constant tussle between people who want complete freedom to do what they like, and at the same time, people within the European Union who say, no, there needs to be a lot of social protection. Compared to the United States, the European Union, one of the distinct things is it's a social market economy with stronger social rules. Does that mean that the situation shouldn't change again? When you come and vote in the European elections, it's not between people who just want total capitalism and a bureaucratic social system. But there are a lot of people who say, no, we need to strengthen social Europe. We've let social Europe become too weak. So when you go out and vote, you can look at the candidates and say, which are the candidates who are going to push for a stronger social Europe? That is one of the big issues which is at stake in the European elections between candidates of different political families.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from this man here. If we can get a microphone to him, the audience.
So just about that comment about Fianna Fáil, I haven't been a supporter of Fianna Fáil for a long time. At the same time, I'd like to defend them on this issue. I think during the Celtic Tiger we feather-bedded ourselves and the government gave us too many concessions, and I think this business of social Europe went too far. Fianna Fáil got the blame for that because the crash came in their time. If Labour had been in control, or a Labour-Fine Gael alliance, things would have been much worse. The electorate would have been feather-bedded even more, and the crash would have been absolutely worse. Fianna Fáil just happened to be there, and they got all the blame to a ludicrous extent. And people refused to accept responsibility for their own actions. Now, myself, actually, during the Celtic Tiger, for the first time in my life, I was nearly 60, I took out a credit card, I drove it to its limit, and then spent years paying it off. So I did the same myself. I did what the country did, so I'm not blaming other people. But I think if Labour had been a strong influence at the time, they would have wrecked us worse. And I have some sympathy for Fianna Fáil. I think all this business of trashing integrated.
Well, it's not a party political event, so I'm not going to delve too much into it.
I'm not a supporter.
Thank you very much.
Fair enough. I think we can speculate on what might have happened if other people were in power, but we're talking about the forthcoming European elections tonight. Absolutely, but there were comments on both sides now, and I think it's equal, right? But I think we're talking about the European elections and the influence that your vote may have on the future of this country and the future of Europe, and why you should use it. That's what we're actually here about tonight. And I think one of the big questions there is the expansion of Europe. And I know, John, you're the director of the Centre for Wider European. But there's a lot of concern among the citizens of Europe about the constant expansion into places like Bulgaria, like Turkey, the Ukraine, the dispute that's going on there at the moment. There is concern among the citizenship. Should they be concerned? Should the voters be concerned about the constant expansion of Europe beyond what would be its natural borders?
No, the expansion of the European Union has been cumulative. It's been done stage by stage. Let's go back to a time when we existed outside of the community that we wanted to be part of. And let's try and think about what it might be like if, for example, you're a young Serb and every time you want to visit a family member in Dublin, you have to get a visa in order to do so. There are all kinds of ways in which we could empathise with people who exist beyond these kind of arbitrary borders. My view is very simple, that the processes that we've been part of, that I think have benefited our country enormously, should also be open to other countries in Europe that wish to voluntarily attach themselves. So if the Serbs, the Macedonians and others wish to be part of the European Union, and if they engage in the extraordinary difficult things that the Commission asks them to do prior to the point where they may be considered, their application may be seriously considered, then yes, I think absolutely we should be open, we should be pluralist, and we should give those countries, most of them small countries by the way, and not very many of them, there is no prospect at all of Turkey becoming a member of the European Union in the foreseeable future, Ukraine even less so. That is not going to happen.
And Israel? Isn't there closer links being forged with Israel? And are
No.
there questions about that?
No, there aren't, and that's not going to happen. The only countries that are serious candidates for membership all exist in the Western Balkans, right? They are currently surrounded geographically by member states of the EU. It is very much in our interest that these very small countries, which after all went to war in the 1990s with horrendous consequences, that the European Union can do what it does best, to act as a stabilizing agent. That's what it's been doing through the enlargement process there.
Like Latvia, for instance, they're a very small country.
Sure, and they, just like Ireland, they have been able to use their EU membership very powerfully and purposefully to all kinds of ends. Now, I visit the Western Balkans very regularly, and I'm going to be spending an extended period of time there over the next year. So I'm absolutely in favour. The problem is that this debate is being mediated through xenophobic and outrightly racist narratives, mainly propagated by British tabloid newspapers in the UK and selling in large numbers here, that seek to present enlargement and actually the European Union as something that's entirely a problem because it means excessive migration. Actually, most migration into the UK and Ireland has been incredibly positive for our economies, and it continues to be so. And in the case of the Western Balkans, the entire population is actually less than that of Romania. So for me, it's a no-brainer on normative, on moral grounds, that we extend the opportunity to other countries that have suffered terribly in the post-war period, that we ourselves have enjoyed and benefited from.
Okay, so these are all the questions for your candidates in the European election. Just I'll come back to Francis and just
one final little thing on that point.
Yeah.
And that is, it's an irony that it was the UK who had traditionally been the keenest country on enlargement in the past. But there is one other thing about directly related to the elections, and that is, as John pointed out, the process of enlargement is becoming increasingly slow, complex, but at the end of the day, the European Parliament has to say yes or no to any enlargement. One of its powers, that was mentioned by Mary at the beginning, is to give its assent. In other words, it can veto enlargement if it wants to. So it's a real power of the European Parliament to say whether it agrees with the terms that have been negotiated.
But is it fair to say the panel view is that the enlargement is a positive development for Europe?
Oh yes,
There aren't any real risks in it.
You know, you think of any country which has come here and which in Europe, and we meet people all the time who are from. I think of Poland in particular. There's lots of Polish people in Athlone, and they've all made their homes there and they've settled down there. And it's an amazing thing how the texture they bring to life in schools and in shops and in jobs and in social communities, in committees, in all of that. We are the better for it. Like I said in the very beginning, we were Europeans before the coinage ever came about. And we're back to being, I hope, welcoming Europeans, always.
Could I just go back to a point that was made earlier? The entire rationale behind the European integration process after 1945 was to try and prevent war between France and Germany recurring. After all, they had gone to war with each other 3 times in 70 years with the most incredibly destructive results. And just to give you one example how the circle can turn, last year, in the spring of 2013, we saw an agreement being reached between Serbia and Kosovo, which Serbia had disputed the status of Kosovo after the 1999 war, and Catherine Ashton, the EU's foreign policy supremo, who actually has belatedly been doing a terrific job, I think, she engineered an agreement between the two sides, which was not dissimilar, one could argue, to what happened between France and Germany elsewhere. It doesn't get much attention, but it's very important in that it probably means that there will be no return to conflict in that part of the world. That's the kind of role that the European Union has. It isn't very sexy, it doesn't get very much attention from the media, but it's hugely important in different parts of the periphery.
And it was the founding philosophy.
And it was the founding ethos.
It was the reason, originally, that they got together, the six.
Okay. Over half the existing members of the European Union were dictatorships in the past. And not only the former communist countries, but also Spain, Greece for a while, Portugal for a long, long time, were dictatorships. And joining the European Union, for all its imperfections, is a huge advance for them. The only slight concern I would have about enlargement is that we've gone from a smaller European Union to a very big and rather cumbersome one. I strongly agree with the advantages and importance of enlargement, but it does come at a cost, but it does make the European Union rather more cumbersome. But that's...
And maybe more peaceful, to take up John's point. Just, we are coming very close to the end of the show, and this is good news for you, because if you have a really good question, there is a Samsung tablet for the best question of the night, whether they came over the air, by Twitter, or from the audience. And the judges are the panel, so they're going to judge who has the best question. So we're broadcasting live on Phoenix FM, and we have another question from the man in the audience who's going to knock you out with a question, I'd say, having heard that there's a tablet available.
Just as you were speaking.
Come on, Mr. Samson, come on.
Would it not make sense to start up an EU army that would prevent future wars in the continent?
An EU army? No, under no circumstances. And the entire rationale, to go back to the first session, behind the emerging European foreign policy structure is a peacekeeping one. And it's not the kind of peacekeeping that the Americans and British did in Iraq after 2003 or in Afghanistan. It is reflective of these post-1945 values of peace, coexistence and tolerance, and that's the kind of structure and the only kind of army that I'm interested in championing at European level.
We'd lose all if we went on the defence route.
There's a reason the United States is the most hated country in the world. Their kind of intervention is absolutely the opposite of the kind of things that the European structures in Brussels were set up to do.
Okay.
But it's what is true.
I'm going to have to give the panel their job to do, because we're running up against the broadcast time limit, which is the time limit on the meeting. So, the panel, I'm going to give you your final say, and what you can do is in your final say, just say which question did you find the best, and then we try and get a consensus. So, if I start with Francis, because he hasn't spoken,
This is all night now, all night.
All night, if you can remember what your favourite question, just your closing...
It was a very complex question, but I think the very fundamental set of questions about solidarity between European countries, whether there should be a bigger budget so that richer countries of Europe should help the poorer, the fact that the euro has one monetary leg and not an economic leg. It was a complex question, but it raised
that was the
really fundamental
questions. The stool had only one leg on it. that was it. Well, Francis has made his choice. Mary,
I would like it wasn't quite a question, a point of view put by the young man from the college, from Blanchardstown College. I don't know if he's still in the audience.
Yes, he's still there.
There you are. Because I think he's 16 and he's looking forward to voting. And he's the future for us. And he is for Europe as well. If people could be like that, if the schools and the colleges could get imbued with those ideas. And after all, this young man came through the soapbox arena last year. Here he is tonight again with his ideas. And I would give him the tablet.
Very good. This is like the Voice of Ireland. John.
I've always thought Fianna Fáil was more akin to a cult than a political party. She's trying to recruit you. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it, I would say. I thought actually Susan's question about the makeup of the European Parliament groups or families, political families, I think that was a really important question, and it's one that really should be aired regularly in the course of the campaign if you're encountering would-be MEPs. So for me, that was actually the most interesting question.
Okay. So we have no consensus.
Yeah, well, it's
There's
fairly...
no consensus.
Well, it's just like the European Parliament. We haven't got consensus.
No, we have to give three
But what we
prizes.
can do is we can force them into consensus, because we can have a veto if there isn't a consensus. I'll pick one. Can you just put your heads together just for 2 minutes while I'm summing up the programme and see, can you agree on one of those three questions? Okay, while we sum up, the purpose of tonight's meeting was Europe Direct on Phoenix FM, was to promote the idea that we have very important elections coming up next year. The departure of the Troika, the fact that Ireland now has supposedly more say in its own affairs, all of that makes Europe very, very relevant to us, even more so in this European elections. The main purpose of these sessions, which are going to be on, Susan has organised them all around the constituency, is to try and promote the idea that people must have their say and have their vote. I think that's the key message from everybody here tonight. We've been broadcasting live on Phoenix FM. I think my panel have come to a consensus, have we?
Yes, we have.
We have come to a consensus, and I think I'll leave the last word to Mary O'Rourke, who came all the way from Athlone. I'd like to thank John O'Brennan, isn't it? John O'Brennan from Limerick, who is main man on Europe in Maynooth, and Francis Jacobs, who is the European Institute in Ireland, isn't it? The
European Parliament Office.
European Parliament Office in Ireland, been there since 1979, and is a source of major information to us. And I hand you back to Mary, who will announce the winner of the Samsung tablet for the best question tonight.
Well, with the consensus of my two colleagues, it is the young man in the front row.
Very good. To our listeners, I'll say good night and thank you very much. And to our live audience, thank you very much for coming, and spread the word. Vote in both the European and the local elections. Have your say. Thank you.
Thank you.